From dreams of a return to a top F1 seat to needing to justify staying on the grid at all, Daniel Ricciardo's not done enough with his second chance at Red Bull, and he knows it. The news that Red Bull Racing will keep Sergio Perez alongside Max Verstappen for 2025 and has given itself the contractual option to do so again in 2026 was a dagger to Ricciardo's hopes of getting back to the team he won 7 races with across 2014 to 2018. That snub is a vote of no confidence from Red Bull's top brass and comes down to Ricciardo's underwhelming performance, given he has so many off-track arguments in his favour. He ticks a lot of boxes with his profile, commercial appeal, experience, a good relationship with Verstappen, and also a newfound gratitude since Red Bull brought him back into the fold last year after his dismal McLaren stint. We have doubts about Perez's suitability when the going gets tough for Red Bull and felt like his dip in form made it a strange time to give him the new contract. He only underlined that with an utterly abject Canadian Grand Prix. But it shows just how inconsistent things have been for Ricciardo, who actually did have a good Canada weekend, that there's no competitive argument to have promoted him over Perez. Given what it was meant to achieve, Ricciardo's second F1 career is failing at the moment, and he knows that's true. He's trying not to view the Perez news as proof he won't ever get a chance at Red Bull again, but is holding himself accountable for missing out on this chance. Ricciardo admits he hasn't done enough to really raise hairs, and when you're trying to fight for a top seat, you need to be doing some pretty awesome things. He's not done that nearly enough. And the reality is that while he still says he'd love to finish his career at Red Bull, he knows that at least in the short term, it's not going to happen. As we say, and he admits, Ricciardo's 2024 has overall been disappointing. In fact, the vast majority of his time alongside Yuki Tsunoda has been. In the 16 events he and Tsunoda have competed in as teammates since Ricciardo returned to the F1 grid in the middle of 2023, Tsunoda's 1.4 grid places better off on average, 1.9 places better off on average finishing positions, and has scored 34 points to Ricciardo's 15. In 2024, those numbers get more damning for Ricciardo. Tsunoda's averaging a grid position of 10.0 compared to Ricciardo's 12.7, and on finishing positions, it's 10.6 for Tsunoda and 12.1 for Ricciardo. And that's despite Canada, where Ricciardo qualified 5th and finished 8th, giving his numbers a big assist. He's still starting on average 1 or 2 rows further back and giving himself too much to do, whereas Tsunoda is a proven consistent points threat despite the car only being 6th fastest. It's one thing to post those numbers against a megastar, but clearly Red Bull doesn't think that of Tsunoda, otherwise he'd be in the top seat instead of Perez. What's vexing Ricciardo is that there have been those fleeting bright sparks, which you can see he's desperate to cling onto when it is going well. Think about Mexico last year when Ricciardo finished 7th, his 4th place in this year's Miami Sprint, and of course that last race in Canada. Ricciardo's admitted he needs to prove that the peaks can become the norm, rather than just the odd weekend where he's feeling good or the stars align for him. And he's still talking about needing to make sure there are no questions, doubts or concerns when he gets in the car, with hints of being overworked lately on the marketing side potentially feeding into that. Ricciardo revealed he went through what he described as some self-therapy after the Monaco Grand Prix, having questioned things he might be doing wrong away from the track. Ricciardo is such a major commercial asset to Red Bull, the RB team and its partners, but the indication is he's been feeling stretched from too many extra activities, a sentiment he has also expressed in the past with other teams. He invited his team and close contacts to give him constructive criticism and asked them, what do you think is going wrong, which he says led to a very open chat and a weight off his chest going into Canada. Ricciardo doesn't think it's a coincidence this weekend immediately felt smoother. He's trying very hard to acknowledge his role in all this rather than send the team down rabbit holes looking for cures to car problems that might not actually be there. That's a little bit of a legacy of his concern over whether he had a hidden chassis problem earlier in the year, which his inconsistent form since getting a different chassis at the Chinese Grand Prix would indicate wasn't the case, and the team never found anything about that first chassis that wasn't working as it should be. But it also hints he's desperate to avoid a McLaren-esque situation, where he's having to consciously think about his driving style too much and can never hope to drive naturally. He thinks he has the speed in this car, it's other stuff he needs to get right so he can access that speed more consistently. It's not just Perez who Ricciardo's watched have his future secured. Red Bull's unsurprisingly taken up its option to keep Tsunoda at RB for 2025, an announcement that featured no word on Ricciardo, even though Red Bull has an option on him too. Instead, Ricciardo continues to be the subject of reminders from Red Bull Motorsport advisor Helmut Marko that his performances this year haven't been good enough. And he was overdramatically slated by 1997 world champion and Sky Sports F1 pundit Jacques Villeneuve during the Montreal weekend. Villeneuve piled into the excuses being made for Ricciardo and his teams needing to make the car better for him, and even claimed Ricciardo's image has kept him in F1 more than his actual results. This became a massive talking point and showed there is a vocal part of F1's fanbase that feels the same after Ricciardo's very disappointing time at McLaren, his inconclusive parts season in 2023, and how he has trailed Tsunoda so much in 2024. Ultimately, as blunt as Villeneuve was, much of what he said is well supported by the results of the past few seasons. Where Villeneuve went too far is when he dismissed the quality of Ricciardo's Red Bull years and claimed he stopped beating anyone after half a season alongside Verstappen. That's plain wrong and just seemed unnecessary given how good Ricciardo was in 2014 and 2016, was winning races while Verstappen struggled as late as early 2018 and was then excellent over 2 years at Renault. Yes, 2020's too long ago to justify keeping Ricciardo on the grid now, but it's needless revisionism from Villeneuve and it actually undermines his argument, given acknowledging how good Ricciardo was is key to understanding the extent of his decline. Ricciardo, unsurprisingly, didn't have much time for Villeneuve, saying he was talking shit and inviting him to suck it. His performance on track with his best weekend of the season was also a pretty strong response. But there were two things it didn't change. First, Ricciardo has underdelivered for too long, and second, off-track benefits did play a big part in Red Bull picking him up again post-McLaren. Red Bull hoped the old Ricciardo could be tempted out on track as well, and we see it from time to time, but the longer that remains inconsistent, the more heavy lifting those off-track factors, like Ricciardo's reputation, are doing to keep him on the grid. On the other side of the RB garage, as we mentioned, Tsunoda's been retained, having never been in the running for Perez's Red Bull seat, despite being the most deserving logical choice on performance alone. It's well established now that Tsunoda's been the lead RB driver this year and has reacted brilliantly to his regrettable post-race head loss in Bahrain to look more assured than ever. An ultra-rare mistake in Canada, spinning out of the points, is the only big error since then, and was disappointing as he was racing very well and set to beat Ricciardo, having slightly underachieved in qualifying. Red Bull's active lack of interest in considering Tsunoda for its main team amounts to a refusal to promote him, which might seem unfair, but Red Bull can do what it likes given it has Tsunoda under contract. It's under no obligation to make Tsunoda Verstappen's teammate if it doesn't want to. That is a shame for Tsunoda as he has no realistic future at the Red Bull team he ultimately wants to race for, and he was of interest to multiple rivals. He's also performing too well to be stuck in career limbo, just as his stock in the driver market is reaching an all-time high. But short term, being kept where he is isn't the end of the world. Right now, RB's clearly better than any of the teams he could realistically move to. And Tsunoda being kept on at RB is actually worse news for Ricciardo, because it piles on the pressure for him to make a more compelling case to stay himself. Red Bull's made it clear it's in a use him or lose him situation with reserve driver Liam Lawson in 2025. It either has to give him an F1 seat or he's free to go elsewhere. So Ricciardo's being shadowed by a young driver who proved himself capable enough in F1 with a good set of stand-in appearances when Ricciardo got injured last year early into his comeback. The longer Ricciardo's form remains underwhelming, the more of a threat Lawson becomes, because Tsunoda's confirmation means if Red Bull does want to give Lawson the seat he craves, it's only Ricciardo who can be cut. More weekends like Canada will definitely make Ricciardo's case more robust, which he needs given he seems to be in a Red Bull or nothing position. The top seat might be out of reach for the medium term and maybe forever, but Red Bull's still Ricciardo's best and maybe only way of staying in F1 at all. There hasn't seemed to be any interest in Ricciardo that he could then fall back on if he does lose his seat to Lawson, as he's not featured at all in any of the driver market rumblings when we've talked to other teams. So this is potentially career-saving territory for Ricciardo, not merely which seat does he end up with in 2025, which is a long way short of where he would have hoped to be when he got this second chance last year.